It was on a cold and dreary night in October of 1975 that I first laid eyes upon the Ouija board. My dear friend, Edgar, had invited me to his home for a small gathering of friends to test out this new and mysterious device. I had heard of the Ouija board before, but had never given it much thought. I was intrigued by the idea of communicating with the dead, but also skeptical of its legitimacy. We gathered in the parlor of Edgar's home, a grand and imposing mansion on the outskirts of Baltimore. The room was dimly lit by candles, casting eerie shadows upon the walls. The air was thick with the smell of incense and the faint whispers of our excited chatter. Edgar had procured the Ouija board from a traveling salesman who had claimed to have used it to speak with the spirits of the dead. The board was a plain wooden plank with the letters of the alphabet and numbers etched into its surface. In the center of the board was a small, heart-shaped planchette, which was used to spell out the messages from the spirits. We all took our seats around the board, eager to begin the experiment. Edgar placed his fingers upon the planchette and asked if there were any spirits present who wished to communicate with us. To our surprise, the planchette began to move, spelling out the word yes. We were all amazed, and a feeling of excitement and fear washed over me. I could not believe that we were actually communicating with the dead. We asked the spirit to reveal its name, and the planchette spelled out the name Amelia. We asked a series of follow-up questions, and she answered each one with great detail and accuracy. She told us that she had been a young woman who had died in a tragic accident many years ago. She seemed friendly and harmless, and we all began to relax and enjoy the experience. But then, things took a dark turn. Amelia began to speak of a terrible fate that awaited us, and her words were filled with terror and despair. She warned us to stop our communication with the dead, and to never use the Ouija board again. We were terrified, and quickly ended the session. We put the Ouija board away, and never spoke of it again. But the memory of that night stayed with me, and I could not shake the feeling that we had unleashed something evil upon the world. Years passed, and I never thought of the Ouija board again. But one day, I received a letter in the mail from Edgar. He had been plagued by nightmares and strange occurrences since our experiment with the Ouija board, and he begged me to come to his home and help him. I quickly made my way to Baltimore, and was horrified by what I found. Edgar's home was in shambles, and he himself was a shell of a man. He told me that he had been plagued by nightmares of Amelia, who had come to him in his sleep and threatened to harm him and his loved ones. I knew then that we had made a grave mistake by playing with the Ouija board. We had opened a door to the spirit world, and it had not been closed properly. I knew that we had to put an end to this, and so I suggested that we burn the Ouija board and bury the ashes in a cemetery, where the spirits of the dead would rest. We performed the ritual that night, and I can honestly say that I felt a sense of relief and peace wash over me. The nightmares and strange occurrences stopped, and with the passage of time Edgar regained his health. To this day, I cannot shake the feeling of guilt and responsibility. I know that we should have never played with the Ouija board. It all began on a crisp autumn evening in October of 2002. I was a sophomore in college at the time. My roommates, Sarah, Lauren, and I decided to invite a group of friends over for a night of fun and games. Little did we know, this decision would change our lives forever. We were all gathered in our small dorm room, located in the heart of the city. The atmosphere was lively, with music playing in the background and laughter filling the air. We had decided to play with a Ouija board, something that had always been of interest to us, but we had never dared to try before. The board itself was a beautiful antique, with intricate designs and symbols etched into the surface. We had found it at a local thrift store, and it seemed to call out to us. We were all excited to give it a try. As we sat in a circle around the board, we placed our fingers on the planchette, ready to begin. We started out with simple questions, asking if anyone was there and if they had a message for us. At first, nothing happened, but then it moved, spelling out the name David. We were all amazed and a little scared. We asked David if he had a message for us, and the planchette spelled out beware. We didn't know what to make of it, but decided to keep playing, eager to see what else the board had to say. As the night went on, we began to ask more personal questions. We asked about our future careers, relationships, and even our deaths. The answers were always vague and cryptic, but we couldn't help but be intrigued. It wasn't until we asked about our loved ones that things took a dark turn. The planchette spelled out the name Emily, who just so happened to be Sarah's sister. We asked if she was okay, but the planchette spelled out dead. We were all in shock, and Sarah was understandably upset. We decided to stop playing, but the damage had already been done. The following morning, we received a call from Sarah's parents informing us that Emily had died in a car accident the night before. We were all devastated, but also couldn't shake off the feeling that the Ouija board had somehow been involved. After that night, more strange things began to happen. We would hear strange noises in the middle of the night, and sometimes we would wake up to find objects moved or rearranged. We all had nightmares, and some of us even saw ghostly figures. We knew we had to get rid of the board, but we couldn't bring ourselves to do it. We were all too scared, and it seemed like the board had a hold on us. It wasn't until a few weeks later that we finally mustered up the courage to get rid of it. We took the board to the nearby woods and buried it deep in the ground. We thought that would be the end of it, but we were wrong. The strange occurrences continued, and we knew that the board had somehow taken hold of us. It wasn't until we sought the help of a psychic that we were finally able to break free from the Ouija board's grip. She told us that the board had been used to contact a spirit named David, who was angry and vengeful. He had used the board to manipulate us and had even caused the death of Emily. We were all horrified and knew that we had to make things right. We returned to the woods where we had buried the board and performed a cleansing ceremony. We lit sage and said prayers, asking for forgiveness and protection. After that night, the strange occurrences finally stopped and we were able to move on. But the memory of that night and the Ouija board will always stay with us, a constant reminder of the dangers of playing with the unknown. I never thought that a simple game could have such a profound impact on my life. But now I understand the power of the Ouija board and the dangers that come with it. I urge anyone who is considering playing with one to think twice before proceeding, as the consequences can be truly terrifying. It was the summer of 1984 and I, along with my 3 best friends, had just graduated from high school. We were all excited to be starting college in the fall, but before that, we decided to spend one last summer together doing something we had always talked about: exploring the supernatural. We had heard about an Ouija board that had been passed down through generations in a small town called Ravenswood, located in the mountains of West Virginia. According to local legend, the board had been used by a group of teenagers in the 1920s, and they had all died under mysterious circumstances. We were skeptical at first, but the idea of solving a mystery and possibly communicating with the dead was too tempting to resist. We decided to make the trip to Ravenswood to see the board for ourselves. We arrived in Ravenswood on a hot July day, and after checking into our hotel, we set out to find the Ouija board. We had been told that it was kept in the attic of an old mansion on the outskirts of town. The mansion was owned by a Thompson family, and they were known to be reclusive and mysterious. Upon arrival, we knocked on the front door of the mansion, and after a few minutes, an elderly woman answered. She introduced herself as Mrs. Thompson and told us that she had been expecting us. She invited us in and led us to the attic, where she showed us the board. It was a large, delicately made wooden board. The planchette was made of glass and had a small, brass pointer on top. We asked Mrs. Thompson if we could use the board, and she agreed, but with one condition: we had to use it in the presence of her and her son, who was also in the house. We were a little uneasy about this, but still agreed, and Mrs. Thompson began to tell us the history of the board. She told us that the board had been used by her great-grandfather and his friends in the 1920s. They had all been part of a secret society that tried to communicate with the dead. They had used the board to contact spirits and ask them questions about the future, love, and death. But one night, something went wrong. The spirits they had contacted had become hostile and had begun to possess the teenagers. One by one, they had died under mysterious circumstances, and the board had been locked away in the attic ever since. We were intrigued by the story, but we were also a little worried. We asked Mrs. Thompson if we could still use the board, and she said yes, but she warned us to be careful. We set up the board on a table in the attic and sat around it, with Mrs. Thompson and her son watching us. We placed our fingers on the planchette and asked if there was anyone there. The pointer began to move, and we were amazed. Next, we asked if the spirits had a message for us, and the pointer spelled out, "Beware of the Ouija board." We were startled by this message, but we didn't stop there. We asked again if they could tell us what had happened to the friends, and the pointer spelled out, "Killed by the spirits." We were terrified by this message, and we decided to stop using the board. We thanked Mrs. Thompson for letting us use it and quickly packed up our things to leave. As we were leaving the mansion, Mrs. Thompson handed us a small box and told us to keep it safe. Inside the box, we found a journal that belonged to her great-grandfather. It was filled with drawings and notes about the Ouija board and the spirits they had contacted. We spent the next few days studying the journal, trying to make sense of the information we had learned. We discovered that the spirits we had contacted were not just random entities, but were actually the spirits of the dead teenagers who had used the Ouija board before them. They had become trapped in a never-ending cycle of possession and death, and the only way to break the cycle was to destroy the board. We knew we had to act fast before something terrible happened to us. We returned to the mansion and asked Mrs. Thompson if we could destroy the board. She reluctantly agreed, and we burned the board in the backyard. As the board burned, we felt a sense of relief wash over us. We knew that we had done the right thing and that the spirits of friends were finally free. We returned home and never spoke of our experience again. Years have passed since that summer, and the pointer spelled out, "Beware of the Ouija board." We discovered that the spirits we had contacted were not just random entities.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to stay tuned for more true stories.